right. Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you to the panelists. I think we should just dive right in, talking about how AI and governments work together to start. And I thought that we would start with you, Maria, if you could talk about how your role in Lisbon and how you operate with AI and work with technology and kind of balance that need for innovation with also the need for some level of control.
Okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, let me just thank for being here and, of course, share that is really an honor to be on this stage with you here, having this interesting conversation. And regarding my role in Lisbon, I have innovation under my competition, of course. And it's really interesting because in one side, I also want and look forward to promote innovation. And of course, the usage of AI is, a tool, a powerful tool for all of us. But on the other hand, and in Europe, we're having a lot of discussion regarding the AI Act, which is actually somehow a way to control the usage of AI to avoid major problems. And we had already in Europe, unfortunately, some cases where governments and states were actually using it AI, and at some point it brought a lot of devastating consequences for the way it was used. So at some point we need to balance our concerns, but also being able not to stop this fantastic tool that we have on our hands. So it's challenging, of course, and we see that a lot of states worldwide are looking at it and, of course, having different approaches. So at some point, it's very interesting to promote sandboxes, to not stop this tool, but also to somehow control the way we are using it. But in Europe, we want to have this balance as well. And that's why this regulatory framework, I think it's, of course, interesting and important to avoid major issues.
So, Fabrizio, you're in the private sector, so you're kind of coming at this in a little bit of a different way. What would you want to see from regulators? Is it kind of like a universal standard? Do you want to be able to work with them individually? What are maybe your top priorities for that?
Well, AI is a tool, powerful tool. No, it can be good, it can be bad, we know. Definitely we have to talk to regulators, but I'm scared that regulators don't understand AI. Mm-hmm. Then there is a lack of understanding of AI, and there is a lot of fears I perceive in Europe, too much fear versus a tool which can be a great equalizer, mm-hmm. or create a great divide. I think AI is such a technology which can help reduce the gap between advanced society and laggards, but it's not there. It's not there, this understanding of the tool itself, and therefore, as a company, my role is to talk to authorities, mm-hmm. to explain what can be possible with AI, explain the risk. But on the other hand, we should not be scared and push back, because it's wrong to push back the progress.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. We'll come back to that in a second. But Shivam, I wanted to ask you, your role advising the UN, I feel like you have maybe a more 30,000-foot view of this. And, mm-hmm. and can you just talk about what that looks like for you, for somebody with your, I guess, access to all of these different nation states and all of these different people from around the world?
Yeah, no, thanks all for coming here, and thank you so much for sharing the stage. I mean, you just said if we could get universal standards. I'm like, we can't even agree if science is important anymore, let alone universal standards. So it's going to take a long time to get there. But I think what I would want to maybe start is with the notion of sovereignty, right? Like, I mean, that's a part of the panel, and I think it's a big conversation these days. I'm sure it comes up in your conversation too. I think the notion of sovereignty, as we've understood, or as nation states have understood it for the last many years, has been in the context of ownership. Right, so you own an asset or you own a territory. But I think in the last many years, particularly now as AI and the emerging technologies accelerate exponentially, I think the notion of sovereignty is fundamentally getting transformed. And that is purely because of the power differential between the public and the private sectors. Mm-hmm. Right? To just give you a very simple sort of data point. So, you know, the hyperscalers, you've got 4 to 6 hyperscalers in the world, right? In 2025, their AI infrastructure investment was in the upwards of $700 billion with the B, right? It's going to hit $1 trillion this year, right? Amazon alone, in last year, the capital expenses on AI infrastructure was in the upwards of $130 billion. Canada, my country here, we've got $2 billion over 5 years as a target, 700 million as capex. Europe's EU Chip AI Act was about $30 to $80 billion over many years. So the power differential in what the private sector is pumping into what the public sector is awarding is very different. So we cannot compete now on ownership. That's gone. So the question, I think, for me that's interesting that we are encouraging the nation states and also having a conversation with them is if the notion of sovereignty has changed from ownership, what does that mean then? Because that's the only way we can think about regulations effectively without impeding on the innovation. And so one of the things that's coming up more and more is how do you exercise choice in systems that you can't fundamentally own?
Yeah.
And I think that conversation is getting very exciting, and we can go into that a bit more, but that's where I think the balance of compliance and innovation will be in the near future, particularly in this AI-driven frenzy that we are in almost.
Yeah, well, I think that AI is a new technology, and as all new technologies tend to centralize, right? Today we are talking about gigafactories and, as you said, trillions of investment in private-owned infrastructure owned by few companies, and this is clearly scary. You give a powerful tool in the hands of few large corporations and not in the hands of people. But I strongly believe that the next big wave will be decentralized AI.
Yep.
You need to decentralize the infrastructure. If you want to own the infrastructure, the only way is to decentralize, to have AI in the physical world, in proximity of people. People should own their data, own the infrastructure behind the AI, at least government. And I think this is something that we should think. We should stop to mimic even government, large corporation, and think in a different way in having an infrastructure in AI in proximity of the communities, close to people. And this will help also to familiarize to that and also to control it better.
Maria, in your role, how do these, I guess, maybe competing impulses play out? Because on the one hand, right, we have this idea of decentralization, also all of this private spend, and then the regulatory state obviously moves a lot slower than this stuff is moving, and even at the city level, right?
Yeah, but I think what Fabrizio just said, it's actually the right way to provide the confidence and the trust for everybody, even for the states as well. Because at some point we are talking about data and to protect data of our citizens, right? And that will be the way somehow to provide the comfort that it's needed for the governments to, you know, to have the opportunity to promote innovation and to promote the right usage of it. And now with the international context, we are already feeling that. So even for the states, it's not only the importance of the military force or the geography and, their borders. Of course, it's really important, the data and who owns the data, who has access to the data, what kind of rules are applied to that data, how we managing it. So that the kind of challenges that we are facing right now, but I really believe that the path, it's right, just right what Fabrizio just said.
Mm. Yeah, I think I do definitely. I mean, decentralization is certainly the way, and I think that feeds into this idea that because if you can't centralize ownership in the new way of thinking about sovereignty, decentralization, this is where I think companies like Fabrizio are quite important as a competitive force. I think the next layer to that I am seeing in conversations with the nation states across the world is if we do that, and that is certainly a path forward, what then does the notion of sovereignty look like in a decentralized manner? And I think certain key principles stand out, which I think could lead us to somewhat of a more balanced approach. And I think, the questions that always stand up are around data, infrastructure, policy or governance, and then talent. So at a nation level, at a country level, I think that is the conversation where who controls the data and the infrastructure, who's writing the policies, who benefits, taking away the externalities, and whether or not you've got the talent to actually amplify each of those. And I think that combination is what really is going to be driving the next at least 5 to 10 years of policy making in concert with allowing decentralized ways of edge compute or AI to come through, but also, frankly, challenging the oligarchic narratives that we have in tech, which is a massive problem.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up narratives, and Fabrizio, you had also brought up this idea that maybe there's not a great understanding of what AI actually is and does, which I agree with. I think that's true. I think the conversation about it can tend to get a little hyperbolic. What narrative shift would you like to see, both for the decentralization question, sovereignty, and just the way that we are approaching AI from both the private and public sector, I think?
Well, sovereignty, already the concept of sovereignty, I think each one has a different interpretation. Control everything. If sovereignty means I want to control the entire stack, it's not simply possible. We are in an interconnected world. It's really impossible at this stage to reverse everything, and I don't understand even why we should do it. Then
I don't think you can.
Exactly. I said we can't do it, right? Reverse things, and even the benefit to reverse things, right? I think we should find a good compromise for this idea of sovereignty. And about AI, as I said, I think that people should start to adopt it, try it, and instead of regulate it without knowing. And this is important because we follow this idea. There are people think AI will disrupt completely the labor law, and we will not have any job anymore.
Right.
Statistics, they are not showing this, right? Then my fear is really that to regulate things and take a political stand instead of be rational and be more analytic in what makes sense to do and what not makes sense to do at all level of the layers.
And I would also agree. I'd love to get Maria's thoughts on this also, but I think that's what I was saying, the four-part framework where you've got, the data, the infrastructure, the sort of talent, because that's what at a government level is needed if we are to pass strategic regulations. Because we've already seen that free regulations don't work, and burden regulations don't work either. We've tried both, and both are quite a bit of a disaster.
I think people and government are scared of a lock-in, to lock in a country, lock in a population in something which is not under their control, but is under control of a large corporation, which essentially is going to substitute the government to a certain extent in the penetration of your life, in defining who you are, in defining the working environment, right? Especially in an agentic AI era where AI is becoming a virtual person that assisting you in everything, and you cannot control, and it's not under your control, not even under your government control. And not paying tax, which is another problem.
I mean, one of the things is that this technology is moving very quickly, and it does make it hard to kind of, pin down exactly where you want to take that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and just generally what we've been talking about here about the understanding of these tools and the understanding of sovereignty as far as.
And also regarding economy as well, if you allow me to
please.
talk a bit about that, because at some point we have some areas of our world that we are worried about regulation, as Europe at some point, and on the other hand, China, that they don't just seem like they don't care about regulation for it, and they are just using it. So the services that everyone is providing are worldwide, right? So at some point we are creating like two different worlds on this usage, and we shouldn't, because I think it's really important to not have this kind of barriers. But I don't know. I think it's a really interesting discussion, but mainly to have the opportunity to keep up with innovation. And I agree also when you are saying that regulation it should not stop innovation, and it should not stop also the advantages that they are bringing to our to our daily basis as well. So it's really interesting to keep up and being able to promote the usage. And even in Europe, of course, that we are worried with the risks that it's bringing, but on the other hand, we have also a lot of funds to promote innovation and to promote the usage of AI. So, we are trying to balancing it.
I think I'll just quickly, and maybe in the slightest of ways, just share my opinion, because you made a point. I think, I do think like China's a bit of a misunderstood market from my vantage point. I think it is actually quite, I would say, well regulated. It's just that maybe our understanding of it isn't as robust as it should be, given where and how they've advanced their technologies. I think a better example, in my view, of a deregulated market would be the US, actually, which I think was free for all, which is really where it's becoming. But I do think also what's interesting in the notion of the sort of tech sovereignty, large tech, I think this is where the notion of middle powers is becoming more and more important, right? Because what we are also coming to a point where, which is what Fabrizio and both Maria have made a point where, you know, large tech is definitely having quite a lot of a hold, and that's where the fear in the governments are coming from, is saying we don't want to capitulate our population to a few organizations, right? Because we don't control the data, we don't control the infrastructure, and we can't write the rules. So you don't even own, and you can't even have a choice in what then happens. And so that's a genuinely real fear, and it's justified to a very large extent, particularly what we have seen in the last many years. And so I think that's where the notion of middle powers is also becoming very interesting, taking a regionalized approach where countries that do not have a substantial economical, political weightage come together to then create economic, political weightage to bargain in a fair way with the large tech and or opt for decentralized solutions, but putting in place proper governance mechanisms. So that's why I think Connie's speech in Davos struck such a chord, even though that speech has been in many ways spoken about by people from the majority world for a very long time, but there were certain aspects of it that really stuck. And I think that middle power narrative stuck because this is quite an important part of the political prerogative going forward.
Well, we only have about a minute left, so I just want to do maybe final thoughts, just right down the line. Start with Maria.
Okay, so, well, my final thought on this is actually it's really important to promote innovation. So even though AI is really a different technology, I think, and really disruptive, I really think that we need to keep up and take the best of it, and also to provide it to the public and the right usage.
Yeah, I would add open innovation in the sense that I think we are really scared to be locked in something we cannot control. And then I think that policymakers should push for open AI, not the company, but a real AI which is open to everybody, that is accessible to everybody, can be modified by everybody. This is the regulation, the first regulation. And before regulate again, try it and try to understand it, because I see people talking about AI without trying and without understanding it.
Yeah, I think this is the challenge and the opportunity, one of the biggest ones of our lifetime. I think we live in a structure where we've got geography nation states that conform to boundaries. Well, some do. And we've got capital and tech that fundamentally doesn't understand borders. Yep. And so the governance is a fundamental mismatch. And so we've got to really be creative in how we tackle this. And I think it's an exciting time ahead.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.